Hey piano people, in today's tutorial, you are going to learn how to choose the right fingering for all of your piano pieces. And the reason the title says don't skip this is because choosing the right fingering is an essential step in the process towards playing musically. And most piano players get it wrong. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because fingering is difficult and it's not an exact science. There's actually a lot of nuance, and I have to admit, I've been putting off doing a video about fingering for a long time because it is such a broad topic with so much gray area. But it's also one of the most important aspects of playing the piano. So today I'm finally diving in and I'm going to take you through the 5 steps plus a bonus suggestion that will help you cut through that nuance so that you know exactly how to choose fingering for your piano pieces, which is going to help you make the path to musicality so much shorter and faster. Let's dive in. Step 1 to choosing your own fingering is to start with what's in the score. So to demonstrate, I'm going to play through Schumann's Of Foreign Lands and People. Sounds like this. And if your score has no fingering suggestions, you might look around to see if you can find a score that has fingerings, because oftentimes, depending on the editor of the score, you're going to find different fingerings. There's a website called imslp.org, and it's great for this. And I actually had to pull up 6 copies of this piece before I found one that had fingering written in. But I did end up finding a few that had fingering written in. And in this case, an editor, which is someone that is already educated in proper piano technique and piano history and all of that stuff, already went to the trouble to write the fingering in the score. So start there and see how it feels for you. In this score, you can see, we're just looking at the fingering in the right hand right now. I'm gonna play the whole piece so you can hear it, but we're really just talking about the right hand. So I have 2, 5, 4, 3, 2. And then all of these little accompaniment notes in the right hand are played by my thumb. So 2, 5, 4, 3, 2. And then now notice that here it's not written in. 5 isn't written in. When you have repeated patterns, it's going to be the same fingering, even if the editor didn't write the fingering in the score again. This is generally going to be true, that repeated patterns, as long as they're presented the same way, will use the same fingers, even if they're not written in the score. Now, another thing I want to make clear here is that when you are going with the editor's fingering suggestions, if there are some fingers written in the score and some left out, it's likely because you'll use whatever fingers naturally come next. So for example, let's actually look at the left hand for a second. We have the 2nd and 4th finger on these starting notes, which are G and B. Now, there's not a finger number written in for the D that comes next, but because I'm on 2 and 4, the logical next step would be to use my thumb right there. I wouldn't do something funky like lift my hand and play with my 3rd finger because this is supposed to be legato. I would just use the very next finger that's already naturally resting on that key. And that's a general rule. If fingering is not written in by the editor, first check what naturally falls next, where your fingers are naturally lying on the keys. And one other little caveat I want to give here is that when you're following the fingering that's written in the score, 2, 5, 4, 3, 2, and you have followed what they've written and you still feel like something isn't quite right. Maybe it doesn't feel right for your hand, or maybe it's really awkward for you. It's okay to change it. Starting with what the editor suggests is a great starting point, but it's not a perfect science and it's not written in stone that you have to use that fingering. So it's a great starting point, but you can make slight alterations if needed, and we'll talk about some instances of that later in future steps. Step 2 has to do with if there are no fingerings written in the score, or if the fingerings written in the score don't work for your hand, then step number 2 is to try at least 2 options. This forces your brain to get really creative and to explore, as opposed to just committing to whatever you happen to do the first time. Okay, so let's pretend like I had been looking for a score of this piece and I was trying to find a score that had fingering suggestions written in by the editor, but I couldn't. So that means I'm going to come up with at least 2 different fingerings. This makes my brain think and be creative. So let's try fingering number 1. Fingering number 1, I wrote 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 5. So I just kind of kept the melody with the pinky 5, 1. 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 5. Now, Some of you might realize this is not great fingering, but I'm just putting it in here to illustrate the point. So this is fingering number 1. Fingering number 2, what I wrote in is 2, 1, 5, 1, 4, 1, 3, 2. And I actually did this before I looked at the edited score. And so this is the same fingering that the editor came up with, but this is what I came up with in my second iteration of trying to come up with fingering. And I'm curious, have you ever done this before? Have you ever tried different fingerings for the same passage? Comment below and let me know if this is a new idea to you or if this is something that you already do as a part of your practice. Now, once you choose your 2 fingerings, obviously you're going to test them out and you're going to play them a few times to make a choice about which one is best. And as you do that, you need to make sure to take into account the next 3 steps because they are very, very important. Step number 3 is to look at what comes before and what comes after. Oftentimes when you're really zoomed in and you're looking at maybe just one measure or one beat of one measure, you'll choose a fingering that really makes sense in the context of that one measure. But the second that you zoom out and try to put it back in the context of the entire piece, you find that that fingering doesn't work or that it feels really awkward with what comes before and what comes after. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean, but first, if you're finding these tips helpful and if you want to continue to improve your piano skills, make sure to hit the subscribe button and click the bell. That way, you'll be notified every single time I release new videos to help you practice smarter, not harder. Let's take, for example, fingering number 1. On paper, it doesn't look so bad, right? Like it makes sense that I would be doing 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 5. The fingers reach, it's really good for these long stretches. My pinky always knows where it needs to be, and I know that I'm gonna be able to reach all of the notes. But when I actually try to play it in context, what happens is that it's really jumpy and it doesn't really take into account some of the other things that are written in the score. So when I put it with the left hand, I have to like jump and find every single note, which is actually very tedious and very cumbersome. And in the grand scheme of learning this piece, I don't think that this fingering will work very well because not only is it jumpy and it's hard to do, it also doesn't take into account step number 4, which we're going to talk about now. Step number 4 is to consider musicality the highest goal. This is things like articulations, dynamics, phrasing. Let me show you what I mean. This piece has melody and accompaniment written in the right hand, and it's all legato. So the melody notes are stemmed up in the right hand, and the accompaniment notes are the last part of the triplet that starts in the left hand. Now, what this means is that you're going to want to not jump around, right? And the fingering that I showed you before in the previous step was very jumpy. I was using my pinky to jump around to all of those melody notes. But that breaks the legato between the melody, and it also would make it really complicated to try to voice that melody. Because if I'm putting all of the melody notes with my weakest finger, the pinky, and all of the accompaniment notes with my thumb, which is the clunkiest and heaviest finger, it's naturally working against what I want to voice. I want the melody to be louder and the accompaniment to be quieter. When I look at all of the elements that contribute to the musicality, meaning the articulation, which is legato, the dynamics, which should have the melody louder than the accompaniment, and also the phrasing, that first fingering of having the 5th finger jump around to the melody notes doesn't work anymore. Now I can look at the second fingering. The second fingering, 2, 5, 4, 3, 2, allows me to stay legato. I'm not jumping around, and I can hold down all of those melody notes to make them legato. This is also going to help me with my voicing because I can genuinely give the notes their full value and not have to cut any of them off to jump to the next note. By the way, before we get into step 5, if you know any other piano players who might find this video helpful, please share the link with them. Sharing is a great way to help others on their musical journey, and it also helps support the channel so that I can keep bringing you more content like this. Step number 5 is to write the fingerings in. Yes, all of them. I work with a lot of adult piano players one-on-one inside the Casual to Confident Piano Player program. And in this program, we use the Confidence Roadmap, which is the complete guide to learning a piece confidently from the ground up. And this Confidence Roadmap takes you through the different milestones that you need to hit when you are learning a piece of music so that you know exactly what that path to confident musical expression is. And on this roadmap, one of the earliest milestones is fingering. This is because your brain needs consistency in order to learn. And if you've watched any of my other videos before, then you know that this is true. And if every time you approach a passage in your music and you just kind of wing it or make up the fingering as you go, you are not building a solid foundation for your brain. And in fact, your brain is going to have no way to remember what you are doing from practice session to practice session. But when you commit to consistent fingering, and it's good fingering, and you do it the exact same way every time you encounter that part of the music, your brain starts to work it into the different layers of your memory, and recalling what you did from practice session to practice session becomes so much easier, and you learn things so much faster. Now, we already went through the 5 steps, but I want to share an extra suggestion with you, something that you can utilize to kind of like quick start your path towards choosing fingering, or really help you build up the solid foundation of piano skills to help you choose the right fingering. And that would be to practice scales, chords, and arpeggios using a book with the proper fingering written in on a regular basis. This doesn't have to be for a long time each day. Even 2 to 5 minutes per practice session can really help you get to know some of those basic fingerings that repeat in a lot of different pieces. Do you have to practice scales, chords, and arpeggios in order to be able to play musically? No. But if you're someone that really struggles with fingering, it's going to help give you a context of what even are the correct options and where can you start. A lot of what you see in your music is patterns, and scales and chords and arpeggios are some of the most basic patterns in music. And so if you start to build that little tool belt of possible fingerings for them, it's only going to help you. I'll link my favorite book for this in the description. It's the Alfred's Chords, Arpeggios, and Scales book. It has everything you need to know and all the fingerings. And I also have a video where I go over all of the proper fingerings for chord inversions. It comes with a free PDF as well. I'll link that here on the end screen, as well as a free 4-day piano event that I have coming up in January called Piano Practice Lab. This is a chance for you and me to hang out in Zoom, and I'm going to help you design a weekly practice routine that accelerates your trajectory towards confident musical expression. You'll learn more about that confidence roadmap and about the milestones that you need to hit in order to play with confident musical expression. You can grab that video and the link to reserve your free seat before they fill up right here on the end screen. Happy practicing.